So what is the big deal about this new issue you keep hearing about called emotional intelligence? Well, I think it's honestly the long-term answer to so many of our issues. Whether those issues be trying to build resilience so that our staff doesn't feel the pressures of compassion fatigue, or whether it's trying to build an individual to conduct themselves in an adult-like fashion so that they don't engage in disruptive behavior. I know that the literature shows a lot of short-term approaches to this problem, but I think that developing emotional intelligence in our staff, and especially in our leaders, is the long-term answer that we've all been struggling for and looking for. So we've come to a time in our industry, in our profession, where skills and knowledge are no longer enough to ensure desired outcomes and staff engagement. And that's hard to accept because we have been talking about standardizing academic preparation for nurses, that everyone should have a baccalaureate degree. We've been talking about the importance of board certification and getting clinical certifications in specialties. We have been in compliance with the Joint Commission forever on the issue of competency validation. And here I am talking to you and telling you that knowledge and skills is not enough. But it's not. And it's time to really embrace that the way to a successful life, as well as a successful profession, involves three things: knowledge, skills, and well-honed, developed emotional intelligence. So, emotional intelligence, I believe, should become the new competency for the workplace. And I think that the approaches to emotional intelligence and weaving in the competencies of emotional intelligence really need to be embedded in our cultures. Embedded right down to our competency assessment forms for orientation and for fellowship programs and for annual performance appraisals. It is really the way that we're going to be able to measure whether someone can do the job in the 21st century, whether our leaders are actually transformational leaders or are they still stuck in transactional mode, and whether we are really working to develop our staff not only to be fine clinicians with excellent clinical judgment and wonderful skills, but also to be compassionate, empathetic, making the connection that we know is needed in order to engage the patient, their family, and each other. So someone who exhibits the characteristics of high emotional intelligence is highly motivated. In fact, they're self-motivated. They have a friendly nature about them. They're focused. They come in, they do the job, and they're focused. Very little will distract them, unless, of course, they're on break. They have a general sense of a complete life. They live their day with a sense of peace of mind. There's an awareness about them that kind of communicates that they know they're part of something bigger and that's really important to them. So they weave in opportunities to have a balanced life, or at least try their hardest to have some sort of workplace life integration. They're able to self-manage. They get triggered. They're human. They feel exactly what everybody else feels. They're just able to not necessarily have it spill over to become disruptive behavior. They have a unique sense of freedom. And this sense of freedom is not necessarily personal freedom as such, but what it is they have such a sense of self that complying with policies and procedures or the latest initiative or how new evidence shows a practice should be done is absolutely no problem for them. So you want me to wash my hands for 15 minutes 1 year, 15 seconds 1 year? Okay, now the evidence shows that I need to wash my hands for 20 seconds this year? Not a problem, I'll just wash my hands for 20 seconds. There isn't a pushback, there isn't an argument, there isn't a debate. They just do it with no problem because it really doesn't affect their sense of self. They are autonomous in that way. And because they have that ability, they live a content life. They feel appreciated, and they have the ability to appreciate others. They're connected, and things just flow. As opposed to someone with low emotional intelligence. These people, I believe, have a profound sense of loneliness that perhaps they're not even aware of. They seem to be fear-based. There's always a struggle that somehow communicates a sense of anxiety and fear. So, we have to, explain this to me, and how come, and I have to argue, and there's a tenseness about them. There's always this underlying sense of frustration. And I think that leads to a profound sense of emptiness, because they don't have a sense of belonging to exactly what they're practicing. They don't seem to belong to the greater community of professional caregivers. They always seem to be bitter. Something's always tormenting them, and they have this depressed nature about them. There's an instability to their behavior. You're not sure how they're going to be 1 minute, and I hope they're going to be self-controlled this minute, but no, they're not. Everything's an effort. There's a sense of lethargy about them. To get up out of a chair and answer a call bell is effort, as opposed to, let me get in there and see what's going on. They just seem disappointed by life. Like life let them down, like they signed up for something else, or this isn't what they thought it would be, but not just in their profession, but in their personal life as well. There's always a sense of obligation, and that comes with the pushback of, sure, now I have to do this. What do you want me to do the windows tomorrow too? There's always this sarcastic piece of underlying, now you want me to do more, which kind of reinforces for them that whatever they do isn't quite good enough, and they're blaming you for that. So they're resentful. And the frustration and the resentment leads to anger and the emotional spillover that causes. So often I go into an organization and I'll say, you have people here who have disruptive behavior. Yes. And can I see their HR files, and can I look at that documentation? And we bring out the HR files, and usually the documentation that's in there has to do with job performances. And the job performances really talk about skills and knowledge. And very rarely do they talk about temperament and attitude, buy-in, teamwork, behavior, joy, a sense of belonging, and a sense of emotional intelligence. There doesn't seem to be too much in that performance appraisal that speaks about the emotional intelligence that's needed to be coupled with the knowledge and the skills in order to equal a really good staff member who's working at the top of their game, that really is showing you high potential. And even if there are criteria in there that discusses behavior, many of us still hesitate to document what needs to be documented, and we simply just say, meet standards, meet standards, meet standards. We're doing a disservice to that employee. We're doing a disservice to the others on our staff, and of course to the organization and our patients and families if we really don't capture someone's true performance. But I put to you that the knowledge and skills that they need to do the job are important, but it really only accounts for about 20% of what it really needs to be a fully invested professional caregiver in the 21st century. And that what we know we need now that we have not invested enough time, effort, and training in is the emotional intelligence component. So that really to be successful in life and in your career, it is 20% knowledge and skills and 80% emotional intelligence. So, what is emotional intelligence? No one really can explain it better than Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman is the guru for emotional intelligence, at least he's mine. Along with Travis Bradbury, I think are probably the two most recognized names in this particular behavioral science, if you will. What Daniel says is, he's quite brilliant, and he can put forth many, many explanations. But essentially what he says emotional intelligence is managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. And that pretty much sums it up. It's having the ability to recognize how emotions act in your body, trigger you into action, and then cause a consequence based on that action. And having the effect of the people who are around you that are probably absorbing the consequence of that action. So he says that there are 4 competencies within the whole science of emotional intelligence. The first one is self-awareness, and that is indeed the most important one. That, once you anchor self-awareness, you can then build on self-management. Building on self-management then closes the loop on what you need to do to be aware of yourself and manage yourself better. And once you have mastered that, then you can move on to how do I interact with the general public, my staff, my patients, and my families. In other words, now I need to move on to social awareness. And then finally, once I have anchored the skills of social awareness, I can move on to relationship management. And I can now actually move to a point where I inspire people to do what I'm asking them to do, not out of a sense of consequence if they don't, but out of a sense of inspiration, a sense of building an awareness in someone that there is a better way to do things, or have a sense of adventure about embracing a new idea and seeing where that goes. So the benefits of developing emotional intelligence cannot be overstated, all right? The higher your emotional intelligence, the more likely you are to succeed in your personal life, in your professional life, and certainly in your relationships, all right? Having the understanding of yourself, knowing your strengths, knowing your shortcomings. I mean, truly, truly being honest with yourself about what I am really, really good at and what I really need to work at, or probably will never master because I just don't have it. Those are 2 very difficult things for grown adults to embrace. Everybody wants to think in this day and age that we're super people and that we can do everything. But that's not the case. Each of us has strengths. Each of us has middle ground things that we can probably work on and move up to a strength status. But each of us has an issue where, no matter what, we're never going to be able to master that. And we have to be able to accept ourselves for that and focus on strengths and not perseverate on shortcomings so that we're chronically feeling like we don't measure up and we're not good enough, which of course leads to the resentment, leads to the disillusionment, leads to I'm never really going to make it in this world. And that subtly pulls the sand out from the foundation of your life and your profession. So, when your emotional intelligence is fully developed, it's easier to be consistent under constant change. And I don't know about you, but for me, I've never put a solid foot on anything but change in this industry. I started practicing in 1978, and before I knew it, DRGs happened. And once we started with DRGs, then of course we were trying to figure out how we could do things smoother and slicker and more efficient. And we had to figure out the model of care and how we were going to pay for it. And then along came managed care. And then after managed care, bundle payments and the Affordable Care Act. And it always seemed like there's this constant change and struggle, and you can't, as soon as you want to put your foot down on something solid, the ground moves underneath you. Having a strongly developed emotional intelligence allows you to flow through the process of change and be able to deliver a consistent product regardless of what shows up. It makes all the difference. We have evidence now that shows us that the stronger the emotional intelligence in our staff, especially our bedside staff, the better the outcome for the patient and the more resilient that nurse becomes. So that nurses who are capable of self-reflecting start to process their emotions differently. They become more aware of things that are just general and not necessarily personal. They don't have the sense of frustration and disgust and irritation and aggravation that they get, that other people get with day-to-day exposure to perhaps a population that is a little bit critical, a little bit questioning, not necessarily complying with the plan of care, constantly pushing back, and that care for some is a struggle. But for a practitioner with good, solid emotional intelligence skills, the struggle is not theirs. They can stay calm amidst all of that chaos. They can stay cool even when the patient and or the family aren't, so that they can be therapeutic and heard and resilient. They have self-control against what they perceive, or what they perceive as which is definitely criticism, but it's not self-criticism. They see it as someone critiquing something, but they don't take it personally, which makes all the difference in how you respond. Not taking criticism personally allows you to show discernment to say, okay, you have a concern, let's problem solve. Not, you're criticizing me, therefore I'm going to back away from you and disengage. There's this self-control, and the way they are able to manage the criticism is far more productive than if they have low emotional intelligence. So we find, too, that in other literature that is out there, that nurses who have a high degree of self-intelligence seem to self-encourage. In other words, they take obstacles and crises and difficult situations in stride. Instead of thinking the sky is falling, they're thinking it's Tuesday afternoon and we're just going to work right through this. There is a flow to their personality, which really speaks to the reason why emotional intelligence is so very important for building the resilience needed to be a practitioner in the 21st century.